Hi, this is Tracey Welson-Rossman from Chariot Solutions. I'm Chief Marketing Officer, and I'm back with our 15 Minutes With this week with Chris Baglieri, who is Senior VP of Engineering for Blackfin. So, Chris, I'd like to just start off with some easy questions for you. So, can you tell me a little bit about Blackfin? Because I think your work is fascinating. And also just give us a little understanding about what you do at Blackfin.
Okay. Blackfin is a data company that focuses on, we focus on neuro and neurodegenerative disorders. And fundamentally what we are, our ultimate vision is really to build a central premier data ecosystem that pulls together data that underpins neurodegenerative disorders. So if you look to areas like oncology or other indication areas, you have these rich sets of information, and we'll talk about later on, that you could do a lot of meaningful things with. In the neuro space, data is very disparate and not very connected. And we don't really have any disease-modifying drugs in neurodegenerative disorders. We have drugs that help you with your symptoms, but not with disorders. And so part of the reason why is the data that we have to work with is really disparate and messy and noisy and not connected. And so Blackfin focuses on tools to both capture and transform and make sense of that data landscape. And that's really what we're focused on at Blackfin. My role there, I've been with the company for about 4 years now. My role has changed quite a bit over the years, but these days I'm really focused on product and business strategy. And so what that means in the context of Blackfin is I look at all the software that we have, all the different tools, and as I alluded to, tools that capture data and tools that begin to organize it and harmonize it. So I zoom out and I look at how do we assemble all those puzzle pieces together so that we could really march towards that vision that I laid out, that building out that central ecosystem of information. That's kind of where I spend my days most of the time now.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot.
So before we drill down into a little bit more around biotech and life sciences and how data is transforming those two industries, let's level set for the audience a bit around the difference between a data scientist and a data engineer.
Yeah, I think so. There's all these like nuanced roles. There's data scientist, there's data engineer, there's machine learning engineer. There's all these almost like niche areas within the same kind of space of focus on data. I think really what it boils down to is it's a difference of let's just call it focus, right? So a data scientist is very much focused on, I have a set of data that's been prepared for me. It's prepared, it's harmonized, it's integrated, and I'm going to wield advanced mathematics or statistics or machine learning against that data. So as a data scientist, I'm doing things with the data. As a data engineer, I'm focused on building out the infrastructure and the plumbing and the piping that basically takes that data and almost like bounce passes it to the data scientist, right? So it's like my job as a data engineer, it's like I need to build things to help transform data from this shape to this shape, clean it from that state to this state, and then ultimately hand it over to a data scientist, and then they run with it. So those two roles you'll see in organizations, they're all shaped very differently, but how data engineers and data scientists work together and how the organizations are built around those two roles is something that's, everyone has sort of a different take on it, but that's fundamentally the difference between the scientist and the engineer on the data side. It's really an area of focus.
So you threw in machine learning engineer. So since you brought it up,
I'll add that one to the table too. Sure. So machine learning engineers kind of sit between like a data engineer and a data scientist, right? So in a lot of ways, like data engineers are probably more closely aligned to like a traditional software engineer, right? Like they're building products and internal infrastructure that we've been building for a while. It's just now really focused on using the data internally. Whereas data scientists are much more on the other end of the spectrum, where they're applying very statistical techniques. Machine learning engineers are kind of almost like a data scientist that is really well versed with software analytical tools. And so, you know, a lot of the deep learning initiatives you read a lot about now, and the computational tooling and methods that you use to apply some of these data science techniques against data, it requires a fair bit of just software and engineering skills to do, like software engineering skills to do this. And machine learning engineers kind of fit in that category. They're kind of like a little bit of a hybrid of both. I'm not sure, it's a little bit nuanced. There's actually a really great YouTube video if you search for that, where they have a data scientist, a machine learning engineer, and a data engineer, and they all sit around, they like define themselves. It's really interesting to sort of see like the overlaps and where they're very distinct.
Right.
But that's kind of how I view it, is that's the spectrum. It's data engineering to machine learning to data scientists, and it kind of like, it fits that whole spectrum. that either means I went too long, or I'm too short, or I'm
yeah, the bell, right. We're going to leave that in. It's just the realities of working from home. So, and I think it's important for us to talk about these things, because data, the use of data is becoming more and more important to all types of businesses. We throw the words around so often, and you know, as we hear more about data being used, not just, you know, to learn about you as a consumer, but how this data is going to change. Let's just talk about, you know, drug discoveries, and you know, where you think data is going and has been playing a part within the biotech and life sciences area.
Yeah, so so clearly data's always been like a component in those worlds, but it's almost been like so I've spent time in biotech companies where like the function of the company is like everything is built around a particular potential drug, and like you like, it's often called informatics in those companies, but like applying engineering and doing data science for that drug is almost like it's like a service to that asset. What I'm seeing now is in newer biotech companies, the fusion between biotech and tech is it's much more symbiotic. And so, you know, you sort of see the two disciplines much more woven together. And so you have biotech companies that are, you know, they might have, and this is where like the words start becoming different in different domains. Like a platform in a biotech company might be generating a massive amount, let's say, of imaging data, right? That they're using to look at cells and how it reacts to drugs. You might need a software platform to fundamentally ingest and organize the terabytes and petabytes of that imaging data. And so what you see is these fusion of tech and biotech happening. And a lot of the newer biotech companies are merging, you know, both tech and biotech sort of being core pillars of those companies that are equal in size and scope. And you know, that's one trend. The other trend that I've seen is, you know, typically in some, especially in pharma, but also in biotech, you see these companies that are very focused on like discovery, like drug discovery, and then clinical development, and then like patient-facing pieces. And they're related, but the organizations are built on like being mutually exclusive, sort of like sub-orgs within, right? And so what you're seeing from a data perspective is the need to stitch together all of the data that's generated, underpinning all like that full R&D continuum is a need. And that's been very difficult for that industry because just the nature of how those companies have grown. And so you're seeing, Blackfin is certainly seeing a lot of opportunity where we might partner with a biotech company that has needs on the research side and the development side. And then when you start stitching together all that data that's being generated from each of those and other silos, and you start to amass all that into a single unit, much like I talked about earlier about building that central ecosystem, you could do that for a company as well. That ecosystem has immense value, and you could do a lot of different things with it both early stage, but also much further down the R&D pipeline. And I think that's where the value is starting to happen now. You'll be able to stitch this data together and do things with it post hoc as opposed to just in time.
So there's a lot of challenges in getting the data. So can you talk about that? I think it's important for, these biotechs that are happening are going to be run or started off by people who are on the science side, not necessarily from the business or tech side. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, there's a couple of answers I want to provide here. One, the dialect difference between like the scientific mind and the technical mind, like there is certainly a dialect gap, just a vocabulary gap there. And so I go back to earlier my role. I spend a lot of time just trying to bridge that vocabulary, and so there's certainly some education there. One, two. The one thing that I think I've come to appreciate is that the lift on either end, like a lot of the scientists might be like, oh, we'll just run this assay and we'll generate a bunch of data, and then you guys take the data and do stuff with it. And like what they don't understand is like the lift to take that bolus of data and like get it to a functional, usable state is pretty substantial. And so that's been an education for folks on both sides. The other piece that's been challenging as a technologist is, like the shape of the data that's generated is really diverse. So if you're dealing with like commerce data, I mean, you might deal with a lot of it, but it's all more or less shaped the same. It's like there's a transaction, there is a purchase, like someone made a purchase, there is some dollar amount that's been exchanged, and there's this other information as well. But like it's all kind of the same shape. It's just a massive amount. And scientific data is different. It's all shaped very differently. It has a lot of noise, and so just if you work from like one lab to the next, the instrumentation that they use is different. They might be running the same kind of experiment and generating the same kind of data. And I know we talked about one of the other questions you mentioned about just be able to harmonize data from one lab to the next is really, really difficult. Even if they're both doing similar work, how they generate that data, you often encounter issues where it's kind of like an apples to oranges kind of thing. And you have to do a bit more work on the integration and harmonization piece to kind of bring them into the same world so you could ask a single question of both of those data sets. And so that's challenging. And in biotech, you'll get these models where like the biotech company might be partnering with 10 other companies, and it's that distributed like group of 11 companies, the hub and the 10 others, like that's your biotech company. So from a technology point of view, I have to stitch together data that is coming from 10 different sources, each having their own limitations or their own constraints or their own specific instrumentation, et cetera, and it's challenging. And then when you fold on top of all that, the security and compliance component of being able to stitch together data that needs to be hyper secure and has potential use in the FDA and regulatory spaces, there's a lot stacked up against you as a technologist to really maximize the value of that data. And so there's a lot of upfront work that you have to do, which I think a lot of companies are kind of learning and feeling now.
So we're almost at the end of our 15. So I had a couple different questions.
I
don't think you're going to come back. But what I would really like to sort of put out there is the question of, so there's an investment that companies will need to make to get that data together, and will continue to have to. But what's the benefit? Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the benefit.
Well, so it costs a lot of money to bring one tiny molecule all the way through to being something that I as a patient can take and to help me with some disease that I have. The benefit for amassing all this data and stitching it together is the further down the line you go, the more expensive it gets, right? So you can imagine a world where if you invest the energy up front to begin to harmonize and collate all this data into a cohesive data set, that you can use it as various points, right? I could use that early on to help me make early discovery decisions, early research decisions. I could use it later on when I'm shaping my clinical trial. And I know, like, there's certain biomarkers, if you will, there's certain characteristics of a patient population that I want to include in my trial or exclude in my trial. That data that I've captured all along the way is ripe with information that I can use to help do that more effectively. Most drugs fail not because the drugs are bad, just because the trials themselves aren't designed optimally. And so that data that you collect can really help you design that trial much more effectively. And there's massive cost savings there. Plus, it's just also humane savings there too, right? I'm not giving like control groups like placebo, drug, and like there's a lot of benefit to doing this. But you are right, there is an upfront cost to it, certainly. But the promise of savings on the other end is pretty great if you do it right.
Well, that's a great way to end this.
Cool.
I definitely would love to have you back to talk about, what we're seeing in the Philadelphia startup ecosystem. Certainly, we've been a life sciences and biotech strong house, and what we're going to be seeing probably post-COVID. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, it was a lot of fun as always.